Hello, colleagues. This is the first video in the series on the writing process itself. In this video, I will discuss some essential skills for outlining and reverse outlining your journal article. I hope that everyone with different amounts of experience in publishing journal articles and doing research will get something out of this video. I hope that you will see why outlining and reverse outlining are important tools and processes of clearly and effectively communicating your complex concepts and ideas through your research article. And this is particularly important for colleagues who are writing for international audiences because this clear structure, following certain conventions to create a structure, allows you to communicate your complex ideas in a unique context to people in a different context. So outlining is that important tool for overcoming the challenges of international publication. I will include general outlining strategies in this video. I will not go into the writing drafting process itself. We will go into the drafting process in the next 5 or 7 videos. And I will cover reverse outlining. It is a tool that helps you to outline or improve your outline once you have completed drafting, when you come back and see how the outline has happened, so to speak. And then you can use the reverse outlining to tag your draft along the way in order to improve it in ways that you want to improve. We'll get to that in a moment. First of all, very quickly, the reason you outline, as I was saying, is to create a structure. And if you want to add a new dimension or a new sub-chapter, sub-unit in your article, it can also allow you to figure out where to put that and why you want to do it. Of course, it helps you to organize your thoughts and arguments and create focus and flow with a sense of purpose from beginning to end. It can help you to identify gaps in your research. This is why I asked colleagues to do the outline before they start the research so that they can plan and execute the research based on the article idea. Of course, things are going to change along the way, but outlining before you conduct the research can be very helpful. A lot of people think research is separate and writing happens after you have all the data and then you sit down and start to write. That is not true. Research and writing should be very much integrated. They're two sides of the same coin. If you plan your research by writing out the outline, your research will be more guided, more meaningful, more purposeful. And then even during the research, if you write notes about everything you're doing and everything you're finding, right, that helps to guide the drafting process as well. And so when you finish writing, you may come back to the research and look at some of the gaps, and you may be able to fill those gaps by doing further research or writing in a different way. So that is why the third point here is very important. It identifies gaps in research as well as to plan ahead in your research. And finally, when you come back to revise later, the outline will help you, even though the outline and the draft will be in tension with each other, right? Sometimes you'll change path and you'll try to control yourself as a back and forth movement, but the planning helps, outlining helps. One of the most common techniques of outlining is called the IMRAD structure, because it's very common that journal articles across the field and across a long period of time have what we call the introduction, the context setting, the methods, how you studied, the results, what you found, and discussion, what that findings mean. I described this in one of the handouts as the 5 granny questions. What are you doing, honey? What are you working on? How are you doing it? What did you find, and what does that mean? In fact, I added 2 more questions in the granny questions because sometimes introduction is split into context and literature review. If you want to provide a bigger, broader context of the scholarship, you may separate the literature review from the introduction. So there's more than IMRAD here. I, M, R, and D, but there's literature review after the introduction, and there may be a conclusion that is separated from the discussion. So if the introduction is why you want to study, you set up the context. The lit review is what others have done, what others have said according to Granny. Method is how you studied, result is what you found, and discussion is what does that mean. And conclusion, often part of the discussion, might reinforce the main value of the article, the contribution of the article. We're not going to go into the details of this drafting process, but I will focus on the outlining process. So as you're outlining the introduction, like I said here and here, you can look at the introduction as making 3 moves within that broader introduction. Let me use the method described by a scholar named John Swells from the University of Michigan. Swells says that most of the times when scholars are creating an introduction, they're trying to create a research space, C-A-R-S, CARS. How do they create a research space? First, they establish a broader territory by introducing the context in the scholarship or in the society of what they want to study. Once they create that broader territory for research, they identify a particular niche or a small territory. A niche is a small space. It could be a problem or a question or a hypothesis or a gap that they identify. That is called a niche. And that niche is established in relation to the scholarship. However, once you establish the territory and you establish a particular specific niche, the next step is to occupy that niche. That is the most important part of the introduction, right? The first paragraph may have the broader context. The second paragraph may have a specific problem of study, but you need to occupy the niche by doing a few things. So here, within the 3 moves in the introduction, there are 3 moves here. It could be 2, it could be 4, but 3 general moves. One is, like we said before, describe the method of study in order to occupy the niche. Here's how I studied. Describe the findings, and here's what I found mainly. And if you want to add a little bit of findings or significance, discussion or significance, add in some indication of that. And finally, some writers want to indicate the outline of the article in the way they occupy the niche. So that is creating an outline for the introduction. What does the outline for the method look like? The outline of the method may be done by thinking about 2 things. Mainly, we could look at this as a part of the design. The design is basically asking the research question and saying, if I want to study the effect of this medicine on this population, on this group, how do I find how effective the medicine is? That's the research question. Now, the whole plan would be, I will administer this medicine to 200 people at a dose of this rate for this many days and track the impact of that on their health. But you may have another group for control of 200 people who you give a placebo and see how big the difference is. So that's the general plan. How do you execute the general plan in the outline of the method? One, you need to describe in the method how you collected the data. What were your tools? What were your methods? And what was the process by which you collected the data? And if you have this plan in the outline and that you can implement in your research process, and in the writing process, you'll come back and have everything you need to say for the data collection. How did you collect the data? The second dimension of the planning of your method is data analysis. How did you organize the data? How do you process the data? How do you interpret the data, analyze the data? It doesn't matter what kind of discipline you're in. Even if you're in humanities and social sciences, your data is really the literature review or the analysis of text or the interview with people. So you have a plan to collect the data and you have a plan to analyze the data, right? So when you describe this methodology section, sometimes it takes a theoretical form, sometimes it takes an empirical form, but there is a method one way or another. It may be very implicit and rather invisible, but it may be visible, but outline the method in a way that will guide your process and that you can come back and use it to guide the revision process. When you're outlining the findings, think about the framing of the findings. What was the research question? What was the research problem? And what was the research method? And as you're framing your findings, focus on the main questions, and so that you can report the major findings that are related to the major question and major objective purpose of research. Select the details in such a way that it not only answers the big questions in a broad way, but also reveals the complexity and the nuance of the research, right? You don't necessarily want to fit the findings to the question. Sometimes it may get complicated. You need to reveal that complication in the reporting of the finding. And finally, when you're reporting finding, it's important to distinguish the findings from the discussion. Even if you're writing the findings and discussion in the same unit, the finding is done as I found this, past tense. You're simply reporting. And here is what that finding means, present tense. You're interpreting. In the humanities and social sciences, the discussion may actually involve arguments, opinions, your own interpretation, contextualization. In the scientific fields, it will be more of the objective discussion rather than a subjective discussion. Whether it's leaning on the subjective side or the intellectual, theoretical side, or leaning on the objective side, distinguish between the findings and discussions by making sure that the findings are reporting and discussion is interpreting. In outlining the discussion, plan to outline in a way that you can interpret the findings. You may want to indicate the first finding and elaborate, discuss, interpret it. Indicate the second finding and then discuss. Indicate the third finding and discuss. In the process of doing so, you may want to cite the scholarship and say, this finding is consistent with previous research. Here's what the previous people found. Here's what we found. So again, it is the implications of the findings for the field, for the discipline, for the society, for further research. Some scholars want to include the limitations and discuss the future directions in the discussion itself. Other scholars keep that for conclusion. And in the conclusion, you can start by summarizing the key findings, but really it is an opportunity to go back to the main research question and highlight the significance. You really don't repeat, but rather reinforce and highlight your key findings. Let's not go deep into this because conclusions should not be a big deal in the planning process. You never know what you want to say. One of the things that I ignore is the conclusion. I do pay a little attention about how I want to write the introduction. In the planning process, outlining process, I give a little bit of time to these three middle sections and I move on. A few notes about effective outlining techniques. One effective outlining technique is to start with the idea of the rough draft and not worry about the details. If you try to do too much in the outlining process, you will end up getting in trouble in the research process or the drafting process. It's always a good idea to keep it very rough. Expect the outline and the drafting process to be in tension with each other so that you should allow yourself to go beyond what you planned, but don't go too far because that may create chaos and no structure at all. Focus on the goals. Don't focus on the content when you're outlining because you don't want to focus on the detail because you may not have the details yet. It's not a good idea to go into detail. Use headings and subheadings for planning, or sometimes some scholars want to use a visual outline, web, spider planning, all kinds of plannings. I go one step ahead from the headings and subheadings, and I plan at the paragraph level sometimes. Let me show you how I do that. I use all caps or all capitals, and I write down what I want to do. I call that method the writing as doing approach. Let me open a document and show you how exactly I do that. When I am sitting down to write the initial outline of my article, let us say I'm trying to outline my introduction. What I do is to use all caps and say, okay, first paragraph, describe the broader subject and context and identify the topic or problem of my study, and write a 200-word paragraph. Second paragraph, what do I want to do? I want to identify the gap or need in the topic of study. And I say, okay, I'm going to write 100-word paragraph. In the third paragraph, what I want to do, I write down, I want to indicate key findings and their significance. That's it. I have a 3-paragraph outline for my introduction. This is going beyond the heading level and making a basic plan, which I call my writing as doing outline. But when you finish drafting by using this basic outline, let's say you add a paragraph here, let's say add a paragraph here and add a paragraph here. Let's say you have finished drafting and it looks like this. What do? We come back and check whether we actually described the context and identified the topics in the draft or not. We come back and check whether we identified the gap or need of the study, and we come back and check whether we did this or not. So this tagging allows me to come back, which is reverse outlining, and look at what I did, whether I did or not. However, when I'm reverse outlining, I can also do one more thing, which is, did I actually implement what I was saying in 200 words? I might use underline and I might say, I need to introduce the bias signaling concept more early and clearly. When I'm reverse outlining, I'm assessing the clarity of the paragraph, completeness of the paragraph, and adding this and saying, I need to do this. So the initial plan was I want to describe, but when I come back and look at the draft, I'm like, uh-oh, I did a good job here, but I also need to do something further. So if outlining is simply writing down what we want to do, Reverse outlining is writing down what more you want to do or whether I did that well or not. So I might say condense the paragraph, meaning I wanted to identify the study, which I did well, but I'm like, uh-oh, this paragraph's too long. I need to condense it. Or let's say the planning was to indicate the findings and significance of the finding, but I might realize when I come back after drafting that I need to highlight the significance a little better. So by outlining and then also using underline to reverse outline, you are able to assess how well you have done and plan how to do better in the revision process. Just to highlight the benefits of reverse outlining, again, it helps to create an overall map and to check what you have done well. It helps to identify what you have not done well so you can write down what you want to do further. And it helps to put tags in your paragraphs so you can always move the paragraph where you want to move. I find it very helpful to move paragraphs if I have the tags of all caps and underline so that I can not only improve them, but also move them around or blend paragraphs or split paragraphs according to the assessment. It facilitates purposeful revision by breaking down sections and subsections into paragraph level writing as doing units. So by simply marking your paragraphs as what I want to do, or what I've done, the outlining and drafting becomes a seamless process of doing what I want to do. All right, that's all about outlining. We will get deeper into the drafting process of all segments of the article. I hope you got something out of these ideas about outlining using the IMRAD model, using the CARS model, and using the reverse outlining model, writing as doing approach, and then using the reverse outlining model. Thank you very much.